Hey everyone, my name is Regina Fuller, and I'm a doctoral candidate in educational policy studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison and a budding educational anthropologist focused on gender and education in Africa. Today, I'm speaking with Professor Kevin Michael Foster, professor and educational anthropologist at the University of Texas Austin, where he leads the Black Studies Collective. Dr. Foster was president of the Council of Anthropology in Education from 2017 to 2018. Dr. Foster, thank you so much for being here with me today.
Oh, wonderful to be here.
Yeah, so in 2006, I'll jump right in. In 2006, you founded the Institute for Community, University, and School Partnerships at UT Austin. Can you tell us a little bit about the work that you've done at the Institute?
So yeah, I ran that institute for about a decade, and it was a time when I was earlier in my academic career, and part of my commitment then as now is to be deeply community engaged and to have the work that I do and the work that I do with my students abound to positive impact upon community, and that it be done with community and in the context of community. So the Institute was a vehicle for a particular approach to scholarship for both me and my graduate students.
Okay. So I know you've spent a lot of your time in Texas. Can you talk a little bit about the work you've done in communities? I'm assuming in Texas and I guess in other parts of the US.
So back then, starting with volunteered at a local school, a high school, right. LBJ High in Austin. And I was just working with African-American male students. And it, went pretty well. And it ended up resulting in the creation of a program called COBRA, Community of Brothers in Revolutionary Alliance. So we had a big title.
Okay.
Yeah, a lot of fun doing the work. But as we did it, it gradually became institutionalized. It turned into something. And we became increasingly rigorous, going from a sort of process where, what do you guys need? What are your thoughts? So, it went from conversation to become an increasingly purposeful group, and then sort of student organization. And then it expanded to other campuses in Austin. Wow. And then also to Houston. And an interesting thing that happened along the way were points of integration. So the first point of integration was that, we were in a context that was not just African-American, but African-American and Latino. Mm-hmm. And it didn't seem to make sense to just focus on one group of kids once we got to a point where we could, do more fruitfully work collaboratively. Right. A lot of the kids had identities more complex than just, say, Black or brown. Right. The kids grew up together. They were in relationship with one another. And what became apparent was that our various social structures were wedging kids, were driving them apart. Oh. So, when we first integrated the group and said, no, we did it by process. We said, all right, everybody go and find a buddy of a different ethnic background and bring them to the group. And they were hesitant at first, and even, dove into stereotypes. Yeah, but the Mexicans, they only care about cars and girls and getting pregnant. They're not serious, wow. Which was just, that's the stuff they were hearing, right? Right. But then once everybody invited folks, it wasn't difficult for them to invite folks because they knew folks, because they were actually in relationship with folks. And very quickly, like we're talking like second weekend, we were reading the opening pages of Souls of Black Folk, just the opening pages, where Du Bois has a gift exchange, and he has his first moment of racial awakening when his little gift card is refused by this white girl who was kind of new to town or whatever. And when we went through the reading and kind of broke down the reading line by line and we're talking it out, 3 of the boys were giggling. And I said, well, what's going on? Like, what's the source of humor here? And they said, let Jeremy say, I'm not going to say. I said, well, Jeremy, what's the source of whatever? And he's like, I don't want to talk about it. Well, it turned out that when these kids were in elementary school, Jeremy, I changed his name or whatever.
Of course.
Jeremy had that event happen to him. You bring your little Transformer cars or your teddy bear cards or whatever, when you exchange them all across the room, and this little girl apparently refused his card. And so they were giggling because they shared that memory. And these were high school students. So it had left a mark on Jeremy, right? Because he still remembered, and his boys still remembered. Well, the important point of the story is that these were Black kids and brown kids. These were kids that had imagined themselves just weeks before of being radically different from one another. And they're just about this and they're just about that. When the truth was, these kids grew up together. These kids knew each other from way back. These kids are naturally bonded by just living in community. And yet community, like larger structures are telling them that, no, that's the Black crew and that's the brown crew or the Mexican crew or what have you. So, from then, like just talking about that and having everybody laugh about this moment opened up the opportunity to laugh about the fact that, wow, we actually really know each other. We already know each other. And then having conversations like, what is it that had us not see that? Right. So that's how we integrated our boys group. Well, a little bit after that, sorry for this long story, but it's
go ahead.
fun and funny. A little bit after that, I get called to the UT Tower. So the iconic tower of UT. Yes. And the lawyers want to talk to me. And somebody had filed some complaint in the Office of Civil Rights in the Department of Ed or something, I don't know where, but they wanted to call us to task for being discriminatory for not having white people in the group. And it was pretty amusing because residential segregation is real. So the reason why there were no white people in my group was that there were no white people in the building except for some teachers. Right. There weren't white kids in that school. If there were, they were like, very few and far between. Right. So that kind of like got shut down really quickly. But as I walked out of the room, I thought, man, these jokers, if they wanted to get me, they could have got me. Because if anything, we discriminated on the basis of gender. It was a boys group.
Right.
So I said, we got to do something about this. So I talked to some graduate students and I said, is this something viable? Is this something that would be valuable, in your nascent research of mentoring and teaching? Do you think girls could benefit? And they're like, oh, heck yeah. So we designed a girls group and we worked with some high school kids. The high school kids were ready for us. They were like, we've been talking to the principal because we've never thought it was fair that you had this boys group that you bring on campus and you haven't had a girls group. We've been trying to get somebody to listen to us. So like it was bubbling from all sides to create a girls group. Wow. And the girls came up with voices, verbally outspoken individuals creating empowered sisters.
Voices. Okay.
Voices. So we had Cobra and we had Voices, and they would meet separately. And then sometimes they meet together. And we had chapters across the city. And like I said, we expanded to a school in Houston and kind of took off from there. So with the Institute, with ICUSP, we did professional development, we did student programs, we ran an advisory for a middle school. Based upon the same principles, by the way, that we had developed in our student groups. We articulated those with sort of curricular standards and the needs of a school and went middle school wide in terms of an advisory program, like a morning advisory. So I did that for about a decade until I went away to early Obama years. I was AAAS fellow, American Association for the Advancement of Science, I think, like Edison and whoever founded this thing in the 1800s to bring science and research into government and into policy. So I did that. And when I came back, I kind of switched gears a little bit and started Blackademics Television, which is a PBS television show that's now in year 10. We just shot year 10 like last month. And that's like TED style talks by presenters from around the country, 8-minute talks. They script it. I have presenter coaches who have terminal degree backgrounds. And so they're able to coach folks up on presentation, striding the stage, presenting to public audiences, and also presenting in a television studio context. And on it goes. So I've done a lot of stuff, I guess.
You have so many hats, a scholar practitioner hat. I was watching an episode of Blackademics today on, I think you were talking about the COVID pandemic. What made you, I guess, I know they're all in the same line of things, but what made you kind of transition from doing a lot of school-based work, the groups, Voices and Cobra, to doing something more broader for, I'm assuming, a non-academic audience?
It's all about, what has broadest impact. I guess I borrowed that from the NSF or something. What, what is going to have the impact? And the work in schools has the impact, but also, what are the curriculum materials available to folks, and what is just out there in the public sphere for folks to grab onto when they think about issues of race or Blackness or queerness or borderland stuff. Like when folks are wrestling with ideas, what's out there? And one of the things that's annoying is that when you're trying to teach and when you're trying to work with kids, and it becomes apparent that they have been fed a steady diet of miseducation, both in terms of what's going on in the classroom, but then also what's going on beyond the classroom. So, growing Blackademics had to do with taking the work of really amazing scholars and getting their work out to new audiences in new ways to enhance their impact. For me, part of that impact is impact upon our students.
Right.
Yep.
So do you have an example of one of your favorite episodes of Blackademics, or one of the episodes that I guess is, I don't want to say gone viral, but one of the most highly viewed one that maybe you didn't expect?
Oh, wow. There's been a lot. Like, so see, when season 10 drops, it's like the talks on that are just amazing. But some of the ones that are already available, and they're available at pbs.org. So you just basically Google Blackademics Television. You can find it really easily, and you can scroll through the seasons. Let's see. Wow, there's been over 100 talks, but Babu Blake's is he calls himself a hip hop educator. He was underground hip hop for a while during his college years, and then for a few years after that, and then went back to school and became a middle school teacher. And he incorporated spoken word and creative activities into the activities in school. And they have grade level assemblies every week that are celebratory of the kids, where the kids bring their skills and their interests. So maybe kids are reading poetry, maybe kids are performing something, maybe kids are dancing, but it's all part of weaving kids' lived realities, home, culture, life, like out in community, bringing it in and articulating that with their academic content. So his talk about, they called them Decker Pride Fridays because the school was Decker Middle School.
Okay.
So that was Babu Blake's. Amy Meredith Cox is an educational anthropologist and a dancer. She was an Ailey dancer. She was Dance Theater of Harlem. She, after her dance career, went back to school and didn't really feel the permission to be an embodied intellectual and an embodied artist and an academic. And it was in working in a shelter where working with some of the girls and women in the shelter, where they kind of called that forth and almost expected it of her, that her skills as a dancer, her skills and performance be brought to bear, and her work with them kind of helped her reimagine her intellectual life. And so she talks about, basically women and girls empowerment. So her talk was amazing. Oh my goodness, we had a blues guitarist, Jackie Venson, who talked about how passion and purpose are synonymous. And she talked about her journey from classical piano to blues guitar and her life as a college student facing depression and coming through it and rediscovering herself through a slightly different genre. It goes on and on.
Wow.
It goes on and on.
It sounds like I've seen just one episode. What would you say is the impact of the series? You're going into season 10. What have you seen as the impact?
Well, it's hard to discern the community impact because it's just broadcast far and wide, right? So I think we hit major markets, New York, DC, Austin, El Paso, where my producer happens to be from, LA, San Francisco. So it's in these big markets. And I don't know who watches it at the end of the day, so it's kind of, I do get these random emails, these thank yous, like I'm going to use this in my class, or this was amazing, or this really touched me, we've had folks talk about environmental racism. We've had folks talk about what they call hyper documentation, that when you are undocumented, you're actually hyper documented. People know where you are, you're in the system, you're paying taxes, they're calling you undocumented, but really it's just the opposite. You feel under constant threat and surveillance. And so how do you write your own story? That was Aurora Chang Ross. She was amazing. She talked about hyper documentation. But these, I get like one-off anecdotes from emails send or whatever. A little more systematically, I hear from our past presenters and folks that are kind of in the community of Blackademics presenters now, of how that the work of doing this impacted them and kind of opened doors for them in terms of the way they thought about processing and projecting their work outward. But the idea is always like the bridge between academia and, broader public realms.
Right. That's great. And I was looking, it seems like you have a lot of free time on your hands. I'm joking. You ran for school board in 2020 and won. Congratulations. I think you're one of the few educational professors I know who studies education is also on the school board. How has your time on school board been? And I guess in your career of marrying theory and practice, what even motivated you to run for the school board?
Well, where school board fits in is that when I was doing Cobra and Voices, you notice a lot when you're running student programs in schools about the possibilities and the limitations, and where the pinch points are and what, kind of what's hindering possibility. My programs were, I guess I'll say effective. When I was tracking my kids were all going to college, some that never would have gone to college went to a JUCO and then on to a 4-year. Some did go into like different trades or whatever, but like you can document and measure their success and their joy. And then many, many others went on to 4-year colleges where that may or may not have been in their sort of family history. So, one of the things Gene Anion taught us, is that there is social reproduction in education. And the way I put it is that education is not the great equalizer that everyone imagines. It's the great stabilizer. It ensures that where you come out is identical to where you came in. So if you come in working class, you're going to leave working class. If you came in wealthy, you're going to leave wealthy. If you're going to come in this way, you're going to leave that way. We don't have this evidence of this upward socioeconomic trajectory through participation in education. What we have is evidence of a bunch of flat lines where you just go along in the same space. Well, that gets frustrating. And it gets especially frustrating when you come in and you're able to do something that is demonstrably different.
Right.
And what I wanted to do was find the space for the institutionalization of effective practices. And moreover, many of those practices would be community grounded practices. So what does it look like to actually build on community funds of knowledge, to use Gonzalez and all those folks' work, right? What does it look like to actually be in relationship with community and build up our schools in ways that harness what's already present in our community and leverages that for joy and great academic outcomes? Well, school board is a better place to do that than, where I was with my programs. And the programs are awesome, right? They were fun to do that. But at some point, it's like, okay, what's the next step? And of course, that's only a micro. That's like one example of the school board work, but there's so much that happens at the school board level. And, part of my blessing is that I happen to jump on the school board at one of the most important times of our education history. And, hopefully things turn out well, but I'm really proud of the work I've done on the school board and, the work I've done with others. When our governor here in Texas, and our TEA, our Texas Education Agency commissioner, clamped down and was telling us that you have to send people in person when we knew that wasn't safe, we maintained virtual schooling. And they punished us financially. And then eventually, passed, I guess you write an executive order telling us to stop and threatening us all with $1,000 fines. They at first were threatening us with jail time, but then backed off that, left the fines in place and said, you absolutely can't do this. And Austin Independent School District, we decided we were going to do what was in the interest of public health.
Right.
But when we did that, the rest of the many of the central Texas school districts followed us, and then the state followed us. And so
really,
school districts across the state, hundreds of them, chose to disobey the governor's executive order. And that started to a great extent in Austin with our decisions. And we literally, as far as I'm concerned, not as far as I'm concerned, we literally benefited public health in measurable ways. When there was a moment when we were told to bring kids back after a holiday, we extended the time away. And when we extended the time away and other school districts didn't, within a month, our COVID numbers were different than the rest of the areas around us. We could see the impact in real time of the conservative choices we were making to kind of preserve the public health. The most recent one was with masking, where we said in our schools, we're going to mask and it's going to be mandated. And the governor said, you can't do it. And we said, we're going to do it. And, lawsuits ensued. And just last week, it went through the appeals level and has been kicked down the road, and we won, but our win was kicking the can down the road far enough to be able to maintain good public health practices. We didn't care if we lost or won.
Right.
What we cared about was that while this thing was in the courts, we could continue the healthier practices. As a result, the COVID numbers in our schools were drastically better than many places around us. So there's been public health stuff, and you don't think of that as a first go-to of being on a school board, but it is the first thing is basic health, right? And so that piece, but then the other piece, this school district is now much more transparent with the presentation and wrestling with data, because our service and effectiveness with African-American children is it's horrible. Our service and effectiveness with brown students from different places, Central America, Mexico,
Right.
wherever, like we don't do well. So we are now much better at diving into those data, presenting those data publicly, and wrestling with them. So it's been a heady time being on school board for the last, I guess, year and a half or whatever it is now, but very, very rewarding, and all fits in line with the kind of work trajectory.
Oh, great. So since you have both feet, one foot in professor and other on school board, how has it changed the way you do scholarship or impacted your view of educational policy? I was having a conversation with another grad student today, and we were talking about how can educational anthropologists and people doing qualitative research in education policy be more policy applicable with their research findings? Has that, being on school board, has it changed how you, the scholarship that you do, or how you present your findings outside of journal articles and the traditional ways that is counted in the academy?
Well, I think in general, we do well to be attuned to practices in schools and to policies that govern practices in schools. So as researchers, we should, I guess, further develop our chops,
right,
so that we are able to build that bridge from this is a good practice to this is a policy that would allow that practice to go forth. So how do you, you got to stretch yourself. It's like, so that you're able to kind of make that transition. I think we would all, especially as educational anthropologists, do well to do that. So that's one piece of the puzzle, is just thinking about our scholarship in terms of what are the policies that support it? What does that look like? The other thing is that as a pedagogue, as a teacher, it's 1:30 here in Texas. At 3 o'clock, I meet with my trustee fellows. I have a team of undergraduate researchers and graduate researchers. That's my fellows team. So we come in and we meet every Monday, and we go through the school board agenda and the presentations that are going to come up, and we walk through them, and they say, well, what are the implications of this? What makes sense? How have these data been presented? Are they being presented well? What questions do you see that I should ask as a trustee? Like, what are the things that you see that aren't answered here? Or what are the things to celebrate here that I should lift up as like, this is good practice? So now all of a sudden, like this generation of policy students, and just also in government students and students who are just interested in their community, are coming forward and saying, can I be on this team as well? And so I've built out this trustee fellows team, and they love it. I mean, they're having a blast. And my like ethos, my work with them is not about adopting the policy stance that I like, like it's not prescriptive like that. It's about them learning the investigative skills and them learning how to surround, how to have research as the basis for their work going forward, and how to think about the impacts, et cetera. So it's not so much changed my teaching, but it's created opportunities for me to live into effectiveness as a teacher, because I have this experiential component, just like boom, right there.
That's amazing. Great. So how do you think your experiences with your center, Blackademics, and the school board have taught you about anthropology and education? If you look back on all the things you've done so far.
I mean, all of it is grounded. Like the starting point was, well, I came into grad school like 100 years ago, thinking I was going to do something else in anthropology, and then bent towards educational anthropology. So there's like anthropology, traditional social and cultural anthropological roots, but very quickly it became educational anthropology. And all of that was the foundation for how I approach my work and how I do my work. I was a student of Doug Foley's, of Angela Valenzuela's, of Ted Gordon. And these are folks who all live in the context of community, right? And just the notion of ethnography, you just live in community in a different way. that allows really, first of all, or not first of all, but one of the things it allows is joy. Because if you're actually working in community and working with folks to name the challenges, and then working with folks to think through how to address them, and then you actually kind of achieve those victories, and you achieve them with people that you've come to know and admire and respect and really want to serve, you just get to live in joy. So educational anthropology is just such an ideal home for me as a pedagogue. It just makes sense. Nothing I've done seems far afield from educational anthropology, quite frankly.
Exactly. Right.
Yeah.
If you look at the future, what would you suggest we should be focusing our efforts on as young scholars, seasoned scholars, and in this particular moment of this historic moment that we're currently in?
Well, it's nice to say this moment, because one of the things that you realize over time is that the moments are actually different. And the students' pressures and the adults' pressures and the students' opportunities and adults' opportunities are different. Right now, like at the undergraduate level, I'm bending more, and I've actually been doing this for a couple of years, and now it's like really living into something big. I've been spending more and more time on critical information literacy and critical thinking and dialogue and debate and stuff. So now my courses, the first 2 weeks, are all on critical thinking. So we spend days on logical fallacies. And we spend, I'll have somebody come in from the libraries talking about, basic fundamentals of research and how to identify, good art, good papers, and, from a standpoint of credibility and citations and students are hungry for that because they're tired of the way the world looks right now, all this acrimony and divide and willful, this sophistry that's out there. Students aren't really here for it. And so when you say, hey, let's talk critical thinking, they're so hungry for it. They're so ready for it. And so when you listen and pay attention to students often have a nascent sense of how to make the world better. And so just listen to them and lean into that and serve them. And so right now, service to them means teaching critical thinking, right? Embedding that in the work. But in another generation, service to them might mean something slightly different. So there's that piece. In general, when it comes to educational anthropology, one of our gifts is our embrace of the complexity of circumstances. And so my theory of action, the structural change theory that I follow, says that we deal in many people have heard me talk about this before, we deal in contextual interventions, structural interventions, and with our goal of structural transformation. So the contextual interventions are when you see someone operating in the moment and they come up with a solution that addresses a micro problem.
Right.
It doesn't solve the whole problem, but it addresses in the moment. And my go-to example is a hungry student who is misbehaving every day at 2:00. And they're misbehaving every day at 2:00 because they're hangry. They're literally 13 years old, busting out of their bodies. They're hungry at 2 p.m. and we don't feed them. And so the teacher figures out that, if I give this guy a power bar and just have him eat that, I might have broken some rules. So that's a contextual intervention with resistance. But I might have broken some rules, but guess what? He does so much better. The structural intervention is when you take the contextual intervention to the next level. You go to the principal and you go, you know what? First of all, I'm tired of spending my paychecks on candy bars or fruit bars or whatever. Second of all, I'm tired of breaking the rules. Third of all, we should be doing something about this. What can we do systematically? And the principal is, you know what? We're going to build in 2 p.m. snack time. And I'm going to give you all a little fund or a little kitty or a little pantry. And at 2 p.m., you all have permission to break and do a snack. And the teacher says, whew, and their life has just been made easier. Well, that's a structural intervention to the extent that you have now reformed your structures to accommodate a lived reality of kids being hungry at 2:00, right? And you can imagine different structural interventions like allowing kids to take food from the cafeteria. Well, that's a health violation. All right, well, you got to lobby up to the state and go, look, if the freaking milk carton is closed, it's not a health violation. Or if the orange juice carton is closed, we're going to allow it. So we stop throwing away so much food, and we actually use that at the 2 p.m. thing, where we allow kids to have that, you know, in these circumstances. You can think of the different structural interventions that can come together that can impact whether kids are hungry. Structural transformation, the most elusive outcome of all, is when, for instance, nobody's hungry at school anymore.
Right.
That takes free and reduced lunch. That takes not having crowded schools where the first lunch period is at 9:30 in the morning, right? Because you're running so many kids through the cafeteria. And so somebody actually has lunch at 9:30 and they're not getting out till 3:15 or whatever. Like, so structural transformation requires a whole bunch of structural interventions that come together. So I live by that theory of action, that theory of structural change, where we're looking to identify and lift up the contextual interventions that people in community come up with, turn them into structural interventions, pair them with other structural interventions until we see fundamental change, structural transformation. I think that theory of action is something that educational anthropologists are uniquely qualified to live into. We can go in and dissect and see the range of things that are undoing or hindering our desired outcomes. So I would call for purposeful research oriented towards intended outcomes. That means policy, that means being in the schools, that means being in the communities, that means doing all that stuff.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dr. Foster.